Welcome to selfdiscoveryradio.com, where the orchard of wisdom is just ready for picking. We celebrate your why, the journey that you've taken that inspires someone else. We support your services, we support your story. Come and be our guest, become a host, be an author with us. Come and see what we've got. Our next show is... Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Ignite Your Heart and Soul Show. I am your host, Sara Troy, and this is part 2 in a series that we're doing on spirit versus religion. And my wonderful guests are Reverend Charles Eduardos
That's me.
and Ainsworth Ferendi. I know I will spell it wrong. It sounded wrong.
Forgini.
Both of them are scholars of the church, being reverends or pastors. They're both beautiful leaders when it comes to the faith. But we are questioning some things here today. We started off last week kind of talking about what is spirituality. How do we step into that divine presence of God? Where some of the church things have kind of gone wrong, folks, because I'm afraid they have. Became very dogmatic, very dictatorial, very judgmental, and not inclusive at all. And what God doesn't make mistakes. What he has done is brought all these beautiful, diverse species and creatures and different colors, different languages, different flavors to the world to make it more interesting, not to divide us. And it's how can we find our way back to God's love? How can we even find our way back to a church where we feel inclusive, no matter who we are or where we're from or what the sexuality is, what the economics are? How do we come back into that beautiful state of faith? And where did it go wrong? You know, in Catholicism, they decided that there was no more reincarnation, because we talk about just this vessel goes, but the spirit continues on and has other lives. And I think one of the reasons they did that is because if people thought that their spirit would continue on and they weren't afraid of hell and damnation, how would they have control over the people? So we're going to be talking about that today. Where did it come in about stepping into divine faith, into God's love, as Charles puts it, God, universe, spirit, which I really do love, I will refer to a lot. And how do we step into that beautiful energy? And how do we be kind and caring to one another and bring back the purpose of God's love in our lives, in our connection? How do we find our way back there and step out of this dogmatic, dictatorial, controlling religion that really is more about dividing than uniting us? So it's going to be a juicy conversation. We are not here to condemn or damn or anything on religions. We're questioning. And if you have any comments, please do leave comments at the bottom of the show page. Please be respectful. I will delete anything that is negative. It is a conversation where we want to know how you feel about it, because we're seeing such a disconnect in the world and we need to start uniting. How can we do that? How can we bring people back to the churches, the communities where we can share that love, that beautiful divine love, sharing each other and the gift that we have of each other, and step away from this restraints, the imprisonment of dogma, and set our souls and our spirits free, because we need to raise that loving vibration. So let's step right into it. I'm going to dive right into this top question, as a friend wanted me to ask it. Why did they take away from Catholicism the reincarnation? I know my perspective, I've just shared it, but I'd love to know you guys' perspective on that. Charles, I'm going to start off with you.
Well, I can't tell you exactly, and I've read on this too, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And actually, in Jewish thought, if we talk about coming from the Judeo-Christian perspective, there is room within the Judeo-Christian thought. There's room for reincarnation, but again, I think when it came down to it, some of the things that relate back again to the control. This is the way it is, and you must believe in these precise words, in this creedal statement. You must believe these things. You must ascribe to these things. And of course, we all know the history of the church and the Crusades, and even some of the horrific things that Christians did to other Christians, the massacre of the Cathars and the Nestorians, and many Christians who didn't believe exactly the way other Christians felt they should believe, even going back to the Great Schism in the divide between the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, some of the even divisions within the Orthodox Church, the differences between the Coptic Christians, so if Christians are doing that to each other, you can imagine what they're going to do to somebody that's Buddhist or Islamic or whatever. And for me and the God that I have come to know, that's just totally missing the point. That's totally missing God's intent. And what you're doing here, Sara, is closer to what God's intent was, is that if Ainsworth and I are seeing a particular point slightly differently, let's talk about it and see where our disconnects are and where our connects are. I love his metaphor of the matrix, and I actually have done a couple of studies that I call Escaping the Matrix. A colleague of mine wrote a book by the title Escaping the Matrix, Reverend Boyd. So, and he, Reverend Boyd, was a student of my teacher, Bob Bodenhammer, around that. And we talk about the whole understanding of the neural linguistics and the neural semantics of how we get to these points. But it comes down to, again, the whole idea of control. I don't have an issue with the Dalai Lama. I don't have an issue with my Hindu Vedanta friends and associates. I don't have a problem with people that are looking to connect to the divine and to, dare I say, connect to and develop their own personal divinity, because we are God's children, I believe. We are created in the image and likeness of God, and our destiny far exceeds what we're living into in the world in this day. So, Ainsworth, what do you think?
I have to totally disagree with you.
Okay.
I cannot believe that Christianity was spread through violent means. That is totally unacceptable. People came to faith because they were persuaded. It was the power of persuasion and the power of the message about Jesus Christ that was so convincing. Okay, I was being sarcastic.
Okay, great. So here's the thing. I was mentioning the fact that when you look at the God of the Old Testament,
yes,
and you see the kind of atrocities that were committed in the name of religion,
yes,
where people were slaughtered left, right, and center, and God said, "Leave not even a little child alive."
yes,
Where babies, innocent children were killed, and the Bible basically says that David was a man after God's own heart. And I say to people, do you know why David was a man after God's own heart? And they said, no. And I said, basically because David would do whatever God told him to do. Unlike Saul, who stopped and said, no, I can't do that. I won't kill everybody. David said, yeah, I'll go in and I'll slaughter everybody. I'll kill everybody. And my thing to people is, we read those things in the Bible, and we've been so conditioned that we don't see it for what it is. If we do see it, because most people aren't aware of the God that they serve anyway, because they haven't read the Old Testament. They've read some Psalms, and they probably read a bit of Genesis, and they've read some Proverbs, and that's basically about it. But in terms of understanding the God that they serve, they aren't aware of that God. So when you start explaining to them what's in the Bible, they're like, no. But the thing, and I say to some people, I said, listen, if you open the Quran and you saw that in the Quran, you would say, oh my gosh, that is ghastly. How could they do such a thing?
And that's what many Christians argue too. That's exactly
Mm-hmm.
the same argument that Christians have when they find that same kind of stuff in the Quran and orders to massacre. But then, Ainsworth, the difference is, for me, what you're describing as that Old Testament God is mythic, and yes, fundamentalist Christians take it as literal. I don't. I think that's telling a different story, and that's kind of part of the problem, I think. Again, like you're saying, conditioning, I absolutely agree with you, which is why I don't think that you can take, Lord, I'm going to get in trouble for this, but you can't take the Bible absolutely literally that these things actually happened. You have to look at, which is part of what many people do, get to the story behind the story, because those stories are pointing to something different, and there is death that everybody has to go through in order for the spiritual rebirth. So it's not a literal killing, because I agree with you, that God would be a monster.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
my God is love. It's not about having to sacrifice in order to prove your love. I've never bought into that. We've also got to remember, whatever was written by man in man's interpretation and understanding. Why are we taking that completely literal and not looking, as you say, at the different levels, or having there are 4 key personalities. If we had 4 key personalities looking at the same thing and then writing those perspectives from those different understandings, we could have a different story.
But I was responding to Charles' statement in terms of the hell and the atrocities of the church. And I was saying that can be hinged right back to the Old Testament. As he said, a literal understanding of the Old Testament, okay? And not taking it from its metaphysical point of view, okay? And so I was watching a documentary some time ago on, I think it was the History Channel, and they were talking about the choice between Genesis and Revelation, and the book of, I think it was Thomas. And the reason the church chose the book of Revelation was because the book of Thomas basically gave the idea you could do whatever you want and it wouldn't be a problem. Whereas in Revelation, there were consequences to your act. And so they needed to have that in there with the fires of hell and all that kind of stuff in order to keep people under control. Because that's how you control people.
Well, exactly.
By fear.
It's through the power of fear. Well, if we go back to the early church, and we talked about the real early church was not the church that we are made to believe that it was. The real early church was actually the Gnostic church. And they were the ones that were persecuted because they were not literalists. They did not believe in a literal Jesus Christ. As a matter of fact, Marcion, you know about Marcion? Charles, are you aware of Marcion?
Yes. Okay.
Marcion was the first one to chronicle the scriptures, put the canon together, And in that canon, he had, I believe it was 7 of Paul's books. He had Luke in there, and I can't remember what else. But it was a much smaller canon. And he said even then that you had to be careful because a lot of the books had stuff put into them.
Absolutely.
Well, lo and behold, the Catholic Church admitted that we made interpolations into the scripture to make them say what we wanted them to say.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
So when you look at that, and you look at the fact that how it was about two things. It was about control, it was about power, and it was about money. Okay, and that's what the church was about, and that's how Christianity became a world religion, just like Islam has become a world religion, and it's done that through slaughter, through bloodshed, through killing.
I have to push back on that, because yes, Western Christianity, and it was Western Christianity that, as I said earlier, that massacred the Cathars, the Nestorians, which were part of this Gnostic church that you were talking about, the Coptics. These were some of the specific groups of, because Thomas went to Persia. Thomas went. What we tend to recognize in the world more than anything is this Western Greco-Roman Christianity, which was that whole thing that you're talking about, the control, the power, and all that.
Well, basically, when we speak of the church, more or less, that's what we're referring to, because that's what's become the world power, you know. And even the branches that have stepped off of it, the Reformed churches, the give me the name, Charles, the evangelical movement from this guy, what's his name, Martin Luther on down. They're basically making improvements on Catholic doctrine, you know, and
okay.
You know,
I don't know if I agree with that.
Well,
I don't know really what they're supposed to be.
That's great, because it means we can discuss it. But the thing is that I always say to people, you know, I find it very funny when evangelicals are looking at the scriptures and telling the Catholics, oh, that's not what the scripture says. And I'm like, seriously? It's like you coming to me and telling me, Ainsworth, that book, which I wrote, doesn't say what you're saying it says. And I'm saying, excuse me? That I wrote the book. No. You need to understand this is what it says. If you read, how do you know if I read?
But the problem is they didn't write it. When you have the scholarship to be able to go, and particularly even now with the Syriac studies, the Roman Catholic Church got the they've got certain of the manuscripts, but the original text of what we know as the Bible was written in 3 languages, primarily Hebrew, Aramaic, Jewish Aramaic, and Greek. And so when you look at that, yes, Ainsworth, you can come and tell me I'm not doing it right, because when you go in and look at the actual manuscripts, and that's what we do now, we're finding parts of the Bible that are in the canon scripture that say these things, but then wait a minute, these words that you have here in English are not reflected in the Hebrew or in the Greek. And that's one of the beauties of what's happening now, and one of the things that's happening with the Syriac studies, when we can go in and look at the Aramaic, and we can appreciate the fact that Syria was a very, very powerful, strong Christian center in the early church right after Christ's death, and this was before our faith really kind of got tainted. It was more about a Gnostic in the sense of knowing, and even that word Gnostic I kind of bristle at, because they've turned it into a negative word, but it is a legitimate Greek word, and in the Hebrew it's da'ath, which is it's knowing, it's knowledge, knowing as a husband knows his wife. It is a very intimate knowing that I don't think that the church or anybody else has the right to legislate.
Right. And actually that is before you get into that, Ainsworth, that is exactly what I've said on all of the shows that I do. I talk about the knowingness, and that is our divine connection with whatever you want to, God you want to refer it to. But that is when you step into that knowingness, no doubt, no need to validate. It is your truth in that moment, in the now. And I think from an outsider's perspective, because I'm certainly not a religious scholar, and I've never been religious bound. I've always been of spirit and connection. I would love to belong to churches and things that really did embrace that spirit, embrace the individual connection to God, where everybody brought it together in celebration, in support of one another. And it feels like that maybe is how it was meant to be in the beginning. It was the spreading of love, of community, of kindness and caring to one another, but then was looked upon as being manipulated as a form of control of the masses. Now, maybe it was to control the masses from being unruly, or, from murdering each other, from doing whatever crime, and it was kind of bordered on the fear of hell if you did do these things wrong to each other. But at some point, it became a business.
Yeah.
It became a doctrine, a business, a dogmatic control over humanity, and took away any individual power or connection that they had. Yeah. And I think what we're seeing at the present moment in the current world is that people are wanting to have a connection again. And there's still so many churches living on that old paradigm, and they're walking away from that. They don't want to be in fear. They want to be in the love of God, not in the fear of God. And this is where we're seeing the differences now. Let us address those.
Okay, I just wanted to find out something from Charles before we proceed. Do you believe in a literal Jesus Christ figure?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I believe that there was a literal Jesus Christ, like there was a literal Muhammad, that there was a literal...
You believe there was a literal Muhammad?
Yeah.
Okay, and a literal Buddha as well?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So you believe these were literal...
They are literal people, like there is a Dalai Lama right now. I believe that there was a person that walked the earth that was, there's enough of a historic record, and there is enough of archaeological and geological evidence that, for me, yes, I believe that there was a person that walked the earth, and he...
Okay, that's another discussion, but we're going to try to stick to what Sara, but I'm glad you clarified that, so now I know where and how I can tread. Okay.
There always has to be some basis of truth for something to grow from. So the way we see Jesus Christ today may be different to who he was, but he was a person that was for the people, in uniting the people and giving the people a path to follow. And, as you said, you've got the Dalai Lama today, you've got many other people that have come in between that have become those spiritual leaders. But we also have to remember that things do get exaggerated or blown out of proportion to serve somebody else's purpose. And so maybe the Jesus Christ that we see in one religion is different to somebody else's perspective again of it. But that maybe does not deny the fact that there was a presence called Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And even I find it really part of what has sealed it for a number of people that I know too is the fact that Jesus even shows up in the Quran. There is a book of Mary in the Quran. Jesus is recognized as a great prophet by Muslims. So I mean, I think we'd be hard pressed to deny the historicity of people like Genghis Khan, Jesus Christ, Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. These people actually walked the earth. I think there's strong enough evidence, but here again, the way that the story gets convoluted so many times, and that it's not so much about the person or the people as it is about the universal cosmic message that they carried, for me.
Okay. Right. I prefer, and this is basically from my research and what I've been able to delve, to view the Christ as a consciousness.
But the Christ is different. Are we talking about Jesus or are we talking about Christ?
I prefer to name it the Christ.
Okay.
Because then I'm dealing with consciousness. Okay.
So you don't. Okay. I'm just trying to clarify. So you don't want to talk about the person so much as talking about the consciousness, which.
Yeah, because the consciousness is,
that consciousness has manifested in multiple people over the
correct.
history.
So that is where our elevation takes place. Not so much as looking towards a man, but looking to the consciousness within, the Christ within. You know, and I remember, you know, I've always remembered, and I take it quite serious, the unity when they say, I behold the Christ in you. You know, and so when I look at you, I behold the Christ in you. I behold the Christ consciousness. I behold the divinity, the God within you, the I am.
Right.
You know, the Ori in you. I behold all of that within you.
Atman, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Atman, the Brahma.
Yeah.
I behold those things in you. And that is where we are to get, when we start looking externally for God external of ourselves and start looking at the God within us, the God that is us, because gets right back to it, gets back to consciousness. Mm-hmm. And consciousness is the creator of reality. Everything right. that we've experienced in our
right.
thing and when it's experienced
right.
is a result of consciousness.
Yes.
Right. Yep.
And when we change our consciousness, we change our experiences. And
that's exactly right.
That's that personal connection. That is that, you know, stepping into your own God presence, recognizing that we are part of that God presence,
exactly.
Christ presence, whatever you want to call it, that presence that lies within us in our I am. You know, when we discover our I am part of God, I am part of his message, part of this journey in life, to contribute, to be of service to one another from a place of kindness and love and caring. We are actually then carrying God's message forward in that consciousness. And I think this is where the church is threatened today, because when people step into I am, right?
Don't do that.
You know, they don't want to do that because now they've lost that hell and damnation.
Right.
You know, unless you pay your fee every week, you know, you're going to go off to hell. And I think the I am consciousness is widely in our different languages is what we're talking about.
Right.
Into that divine presence of God, Christ within you, just within you.
Right.
Can I make a quick statement? Charles, you want to say something?
No, go ahead, Ainsworth.
Okay, it's like, you know, if you go back to the book of Genesis and you have the man and the woman in the Garden of Eden, and the serpent appears, right, to the woman and says, you can't eat of that, the fruit of the trees in the garden? And she says, oh yeah, we can eat it. You just can't eat of that one. He says, you can't eat of that one? He says, no. He says, you know why? She says, why? He says, it's obvious, because God knows the day that you eat of that fruit, your eyes will be open and you'll become like gods, knowing good and evil. And she said, yeah? I said, yeah.
I want some of that.
Yeah, I want some of that.
So she goes and she checks it out,
right.
And her eyes are suddenly open and she realized, shucks, I'm naked. Didn't know I was naked. Okay. And they cover themselves up, right, with the fig skin. Now, I've had people tell me that meant that they stepped into duality, and that's what created the problem. Okay. And that's where I differ, because the key thing was the devil said that when you take of the fruit, your eyes will be open and you will become like gods, knowing good and evil. In other words, the divinity within you will rise up, will manifest itself. Here's what God says, the gods, the Elohims said, when they met after the man and woman had their eyes open, they turned around and said, man has become like us, knowing good and evil. So they admitted that the man and woman had now achieved God consciousness. Now, good and evil is like it's like when we say it's called I think it's a mesmerism, where, for example, we talk about the long and short of it all, right? It's just simply all embracing. You know all things. That's basically what it means. It doesn't mean that you know evil as such, but your eyes are now open and you know all things. So the serpent was the one that awakened the consciousness in the man and woman and alerted them to their nakedness. As the story is told, Charles, you got to help me, or Sara, about the king who put on this fine garment and was walking down
the naked king. Everybody else saw him as naked,
yeah.
but he thought he was down in.
Yeah.
You had no clothes.
Yes, exactly. That's it.
Until the little boy pointed out,
Yeah.
but the king naked.
Yeah, right.
And so that was the thing. The scales came off their eyes, and suddenly they realized their nakedness. They realized that they had not been clothed in the God consciousness, which was theirs, and so therefore they suddenly clothed themselves again. They became clothed in that God consciousness. And so
the question is why? I mean, if are we then meant to be ashamed of our nakedness? Why is it suddenly there has to be the clothing, the covering up of it?
I don't take it as a literal nakedness.
No,
as an exposure to the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if people, let me just take an example. People that are in a cult, right? Under the charismatic leader, whatever, they're not aware that they're being mind controlled. As far as they're concerned, they're doing this with their own free will, whatever. But on the outside, somebody looking in realizes what's happened. Now, if they're able to penetrate the dark a coat that's on their eyes, and able to peel it off and get them to see what's happening to them, and they get out of it, then over time, they'll begin to realize, wow, how did I ever get up there? How did I ever do that?
But that's a good question. How do we allow ourselves to do that? You've got people like yourself, Haynes, where the church meant something else to you, and we go to church for that salvation of our soul, for our sanctuary, for the God will love you and forgive you your sins, and it's like we're brought up with this doctrine all the way along the line. The mind control, the 10 commandments, you must be, forget about resurrection, you're going to go to hell if you don't believe. So all of these ones have a certain amount of control, and I think what we're seeing is the liberation of taking our control back, because the serpent is talking to us again. Charles?
The serpent has awakened. Yes, Charles, go ahead. Sorry.
Even the commandments, again, it goes back to what Ainsworth was saying earlier, the whole idea of control. And understanding what is the meaning behind the meaning of so many of these things. It's interesting too, the question when God visited Adam and Eve afterwards, which again I think that is a metaphor, it's a story.
Allegory, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, God said, who told you were naked?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, but here's the thing that part of our awakening is awakening to the fact that we believe what we want to believe. Like Ainsworth, I was devastated when it's like all this bovine excrement that the church has been giving me that I bought into and went along with and everything. But part of that was, again, going back to what Ainsworth was saying, having been conditioned to hear and believe what I had been conditioned to want to believe, that really isn't true, So, and then to start to open to that knowledge that is ultimately within everybody. The whole idea of reading the Akashic records and everything within every one of us. it's there. I mean, Jesus's message, Jesus said to the people that were following him, quit worshiping me. All the things I'm doing, you too can do these same things and even greater works than these. It's not about that, you know. And as much as they worked to make him the Messiah, he was one that was going to solve the problem. That's part of our human dilemma. We want somebody else to do it for us rather than taking responsibility.
And our ownership is our ownership. You know, the thing is, we've got this big word called choice. And we can choose to take this path or this path, but it's a choice that you've made. Even abstaining from a choice is a choice that you've made. And when we actually have to step into our own presence, our own purpose for being here, our own divineness within, and say, I need to take responsibility and ownership for this, for my action, for my words.
No, you don't do that. The church will do that for you.
Exactly. And you know, and that's the thing is, for some people, it's very scary because they've been led along their entire lives of being told what they should do. And they've been told guilt. If you do not do what God tells you to do, if you have that thought, if you have that lust, if you have that passion, if you have this or that doesn't serve the church, not God, but the church, guilt is now imposed upon you. And I think we really have to start peeling away those layers, don't we? Because as you said, when we allow Christ, God, Gus, whatever within us and work from the inside out, that's when we are in the liberation of true God's divine presence and our purpose here. But how do we get people to embrace that if they're still so married to the doctrine of guilt and conformity and control and the fear of hell? Hell is what you make out of life. You can have heaven and hell right here.
Sara, I think Gus is doing that because, as you just said a little bit earlier, you know, there are people that are becoming they are questioning more. They are looking beyond. There are those that have just watched. I did a homegoing celebration. A person passed, and they my infamy was heard of, and so they asked me if I would do the service, and basically we just, you know, I said, listen, they're you know, either here or they're busy doing something else on another plane, but this isn't about them because they've already left here in the sense that we know it. You know, this is about, you know, what decisions are you making, and where are you in your thought and consciousness and everything. And you know, had several people come to me afterwards and just thanked me for just kind of giving them words that helped them release a lot of the guilt that had been placed on them by institutionalized religion and everything. So,
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, sorry, I interrupted you. I thought you had finished.
No, go ahead.
I realized you were continuing. My apologies.
No problem. But all I was going to say was, you know, it's just that type of a thing to offer. Sometimes that shift, and I don't know about you, Ainsworth, and what you've experienced, but there's sometimes I was very stuck in certain beliefs and went through a lot of guilt. Oh my God, you know, I'm getting off of the orthodox path of how you are supposed to do it, and oh my God, am I going to go to hell? You know, and so you know, there are a lot of people, and I just feel like part of my mission is to provoke that, to agitate that that line of thinking, and offer people there's another way that you can look at this, and asking the question, do you really believe? Case in point, the Our Father, and lead us not into temptation. Really? Do you think God, the God of love, is going to lead you into temptation? That goes back to that Old Testament God that's killing all the children and the cattle and everything. It's like that. Seriously?
So no, we're going to have to conclude the show today, the second part of it. And we hope that you got something out of it in the form of questioning. You know, the thing is we're not droids. We're not sheeple. We're not mindless. We're not heartless or soulless. We've just lost our connection. And what we need to do is reconnect and understand it isn't, as you said, Ainsworth, for someone else to tell you how to be. It is that is our responsibility, and one of the reasons why we're here on this journey in life, in our self-discovery of what are we here for, what do we do here to serve, how do we find our connection, how do we help one another and this beautiful planet. And it isn't about any one institution governing us.
Can I beg for something?
Yes, and then please also let people know how they can get hold of you, and then I'll go over to Charles.
Can I beg for a third session with Charles?
Charles?
Would you be open to that? Because Sara just talked about some things there about connecting to divine purpose and destiny and stuff like that. And I think that would be an excellent thing for us to discuss.
Yes, I think.
So we don't have
we've talked a lot about religion, but we haven't talked a lot about the spirituality. And I think,
correct,
would be let us go into the spirit.
Correct. So let's do that. Forget about the religion. We're not going to deal with religion next time. We're just going to deal with
yes, my favorite subject.
Charles, Charles.
So how do folks get a hold of you, Ainsworth, and then I'll close out?
Okay. My website is partially up now. I opened one article. It's wavehealingcenter.com. You can go there.
Give your Facebook as well, love.
My Facebook page is Global Transformation. Facebook.com/Wave Global Transformation. And basically that's it. You can either get to me through my website. We've got a couple books on Amazon. The last one that I did was Christ the Serpent, Ancient African Mystery Series. And that has been going pretty well. So you can get that as well on Amazon.
Excellent. And yes, we will do a part 3. Charles.
Oh,
how do people find you, darling?
I am at All Saints Lutheran Church. Was it All Saints Olmsted Falls.us, and that's my renegade church. And then I'm also doing the coaching, executive coaching, and helping people raise their consciousness, whether it's at a personal level or a business level. And I'm loving that spirituality is coming more out in the open in the workplace. And that is victoriousliving.com.
Excellent. And we are going to do a third one. Yes, I think we've covered the religion. We know where we went wrong, you know, and the thing is that where can we go right now? That's the real question. And we know that, you know, that fourth dimension leading up to the fifth dimension, it's knocking on people's hearts and souls. They're waking up. They're feeling things, but they don't quite understand where to take it. And the new paradigm in spiritual teaching is to show people how to bring the Christ, the God, the church from within. And I think we're going to see in the next decade churches like both of yours change in the way that we don't preach, but what we do is invite conversation and community and celebration of life. We've been sent to hell and damnation and everything else for centuries now. How about hallelujah, let's step into life and love and laughter and support one another, because we certainly need to lighten up. So yes, there's going to be a part 3, folks, where we are going to concentrate on raising our spirit and our divineness from within. So thank you so much, gentlemen. All right, so let's say goodbye to everybody, and I'm going to set up another appointment with these guys, and we're going to give you another chapter. Everything comes well in 3s, doesn't it? So bye for now, folks.
Goodbye.
For more wonderful shows like this, please go to selfdiscoveryradio.com, podcasts, and see our lineup. And if you wish to support us, we have a funded button. Please stay tuned for our next show.